Oh geez. Okay, here we go. Hi, Nintendine here. You might know me as the guy that's always complaining about Nintendo. And while I will gladly wear that title like a badge of honor, sometimes I also want to help the people that are buying these things, because Lord knows Nintendo is just not doing a very good job keeping their people informed. See, last generation it was very simple. Nintendo's game plan was kind of obvious. The Wii U had failed, but they made a ton of games on there, a ton of very good games. But since they had a user base that capped off around 13-ish million, a little under 10% of what we saw with the Switch user base, then Nintendo found that the best course of action was to scrap the Wii U, pretend it never existed, take all of those games, throw them on a small little cartridge, and sell them to the unassuming masses at a full price of $60 for every single game, even if they were only $20 or $30 on the Wii U. This was their marketing strategy. This is how they succeeded so well last gen. Like, you got Mario Kart 8, we associate this game with the Switch. Zelda Breath of the Wild, we associate this game with the Switch. Those are both Wii U titles, and they were both year one games for the Nintendo Switch. Tropical Freeze, announced for the Wii U, and everybody was complaining because it wasn't another Metroid game. Brought it to the Switch, added Funky Kong, and now it's like one of the most loved Donkey Kong games ever. Also, when it was on the Switch, they charged an extra $10 compared to what they charged on the Wii U when the game first came out. Pretty much every single good game that was on the Nintendo Switch either built off of an engine that started off on the Wii U, or it was directly ported over, oftentimes not having any significant changes. And it worked very well. It allowed Nintendo to make a whole lot of money without having to spend a crap ton of money making games. Since an overwhelming majority of the Switch user base did not have a Wii U, for them it just felt like they were playing new Nintendo games. And since we had gone through a once-in-a-lifetime, maybe even 2 lifetimes worldwide pandemic, it really helped extend the life of the Switch in this weird little rare occasion where both the company that is making the games and ripping people off, as well as the people that are buying the games and smiling while playing them, are happy. It's not oftentimes the stars align like that, but when they do, it is glorious. The problem is, after you go through a situation like the Wii U, and then you go through the circumstances of a pandemic, eventually you're kind of like looking at the company and being like, all right, now that we're good, and now that everybody's healthy, and you guys have never done financially better than you did last time, and we bought all of your games multiple times over, just so that we can make sure you're giving us good quality stuff, what do you have in store for us going forward? And I can only imagine the folks over at Nintendo just kind of looked over and were like, what do you mean? That this is what we do now? So we're like, you can't just keep doing that. The Switch 1 was a very successful console. These games have all sold very well. There isn't a worldwide pandemic anymore. Technology has evolved dramatically in this past decade from 2015 to 2025, and your last consoles was running games that were made in 2013. What are you going to do differently this time around in order to make sure that we're experiencing an actual new Nintendo generation? And at that point, you could always count on the innovative folks at Nintendo to figure it out. Updates and upgrade packs for old games that should have very much been moved on from by now, instead are having their shelf life refreshed, even topping sales charts yet again. Also, that Nintendo could effectively do the same thing that they did back with the Switch 1, where they artificially increased the life cycle of their console by bringing over the games from the last generation and using them to fill up the calendar so people can shut up and consume. It is mind-boggling to me that we are in January 21st, 2026, and I don't think we've gotten a single new first-party announcement since the April Direct. And even back then, what did we get announced? Donkey Kong and Kirby? Was that Hyrule Warriors as well? I don't remember if that came announced in that Direct or if it was in the third-party Direct. But the reason why people think 2026 looks so grim is because Nintendo will not share their information of what's coming out. Instead, they're more interested in padding out their calendars with updates like the Donkey Kong one that we got today. Which, it's a whole other discussion altogether. Alright, look, so I said I was gonna help people in this video, right? I guess I'm not really doing a good job at that. But here's the situation. You went to the store, you bought a Switch 2. And then you jumped on YouTube because you're trying to figure out what the Switch 2 games are. And most people are kind of like, there really aren't any Switch 2 games right now. So then you're like, what do you mean? Like, I'm seeing all these things that are called Switch 2 editions. What are those? So Switch 2 edition games are Switch 1 games, which for the most part are Wii U ports, or they look like Wii U games, that Nintendo casually decided to update for people so that they can enjoy it on their new console. So now I know what your follow-up question is going to be. I thought that when I was buying the new console, I would get all of the Switch 1 games automatically updated. Yeah, most people thought that, but that's actually not what ended up happening. Instead, what happened is Nintendo was like, if you want to enjoy the Switch 1 game on your brand new $450 to $500 console, then you need to pay anywhere between $10 to $20, and if it's a $10 upgrade, if you have the expansion pass for Nintendo Switch Online, that's a whole separate discussion, then we'll actually waive that $10 fee and give you the Switch 2 upgrade for free. But technically, Nintendo didn't actually say this. It was Nintendo fans jumping to conclusions and saying it on behalf of Nintendo. So now I know what you're thinking. You're probably like, oh, well, I have a whole lot of Switch 1 games. I'm wondering how much I'm going to have to spend for each one of them. I'm hoping most of them are just that free included with NSO upgrade. Yeah, well, there's actually not that many Switch 2 edition titles just yet. I know, that seems bizarre because the Nintendo Switch 2 released in 2025, and most people expected that it was going to be released in 2022, so they spent the last 2 or 3 years of the Switch 1's life waiting for all of the brand new games because the Switch 1's library, the best hitters were all very top-heavy prior to the pandemic, so we all kind of expected that we'd get into the Switch 2, it would hit the ball running, and, at worst, we figured that if you were going to be getting the new Switch 2, you'd be able to play all your games upgraded, so maybe like this whole Switch 2 edition upgrade pack thing would be pretty awesome right off the bat. You'd have all of your Switch 1 games with these nice upgrades, and they would be included with Nintendo Switch Online potentially, but no, there's actually very few Switch 2 edition titles, and most of them are going to require you to pay $20 just for the extra frame bump. Although technically, when you're paying that $20, you might get an additional DLC, we'll call it. I know the following question is the DLC worth the $20? That's debatable. For the most part, the common consensus seems to be no. And now I know your next follow-up question. Can I just play the game with the frame bump and the resolution bumps without the $20? And once again, no. You are forced to buy this additional DLC if you want to play your Switch 1 game on your Switch 2 with the improvements of the Switch 2. So now, I'm guessing you're pretty confused, because we all are, we all were, and we've been trying to kind of go through this for the past 6 or 7 months. But there is a positive in all this. The Nintendo Switch 2 is backwards compatible. It can play every single one of your Switch 1 games. You're not going to get a performance upgrade. Some of the games that were basically broken on the Switch 1 will run more smooth, so I guess that's technically a performance upgrade, maybe, depending on how optimistic of a human you are. And the Switch 2, it's a bigger screen. It feels nicer in the hands, I think, for some people. So your handheld experience might feel better, is what some people had foolishly thought months ago. But unfortunately, with that, we realized 2 very bad things. First off, the LCD, the actual screen itself on the Switch 2, is technically inferior to the Switch 1's LCD. There's a phenomena called ghosting. It's when the LCDs suck. I'm not really a technical person. Now, hopefully, you're not somebody who's sensitive to this and you won't notice it, but it seems to affect quite a few people. But even if that doesn't get you, there is another issue in that the Switch 2 display on the handheld it supports up to 1080p. It's a larger screen. And all of the Switch 1 games, when you're playing them in handheld, are 720. So when you take like a 720 game and you throw it on a 1080 screen, technically the pixel density is kind of like spread apart, I think. Again, I'm not very technical, but I know it looks worse. And once again, hopefully you're somebody that's not too sensitive to this. And I know what your follow-up question is going to be, because everybody asks the same thing. The Switch 1 games also ran in 1080p when they were docked, right? Why don't they just put the docked resolution in the handheld mode? And yeah, that's a very good question. Everybody's asking that same one. And now I'm guessing here's your next question, right? You're like, well, if there are only a few games that actually got some kind of improvements on the Nintendo Switch 2, and Nintendo is taking their sweet old time releasing any brand new Nintendo titles for this new Nintendo console, you'd expect like a much larger library laid out where everybody knows what they're going to be buying for the next year or so. Is it really even worth it getting a Nintendo Switch 2? Because unless I specifically enjoy those Switch 2 edition games and I really want to play them again, I might as well just keep my Nintendo Switch 1 and play the games on there. Right, like maybe Mario Odyssey, Mario 3D Land, Super Mario Bros. Maybe you're a Mario platformer person and you're just like, I love all my Mario games, I'm just gonna play them on my Switch 1. I wanted to get a Switch 2 because I wanted to get better Mario games. If those aren't coming and they're not even announced, what's the point? I might as well just stick with my Switch 1. Well, okay, so in addition to all of the upgrade packs that are there, in addition to all the brand new games that Nintendo has not announced yet, there are actually some Switch 1 titles that are given free updates that make them better on the Switch 2, usually increasing frame rate and resolution. I know your follow-up question is going to be like, oh good, so like they're playing in 4K and 60 frames per second, but no, because if you read the fine print, Nintendo didn't say their games would be 4K 60 frames per second. They said they could support up to 4K and 60 frames per second, not necessarily at the same time, and often it's not 4K or 60 frames per second. It's just better than the 1080p that we were getting on the Switch 1. And yeah, let's move on from that conversation, because everybody else is doing that. But the point is, you're going to be getting those Switch 1 games, and they're going to be performing better, and they're going to look better on the Switch 2. And I know, we said this earlier when I told you that you weren't getting improvements on your games for the Switch 1, so you're like, why are you lying to me? And now just telling me that there are actually Switch 1 games that are getting better performance on the Switch 2. And it's because there are really not that many of them. They really only got the main games, like 3D Mario games, because I don't think they're releasing a 3D Mario game anytime soon, so they gotta keep people happy somehow. Although, they also got the top-down Zelda games, Link's Awakening and Echoes of Wisdom, because, you know, those are the games that everybody was looking for the increased resolution and performance on. And since they did Mario 3D World, because it's built off of the same engine, that made doing Captain Toad very easy. And sometimes they'll just pick a random game, like Donkey Kong Country Returns, and they'll give you a Switch 2 update for that. And I am completely aware of exactly what you're about to ask me. Donkey Kong Country Returns is on the Switch? Yeah, the Wii game. They brought it back to the Switch, and they gave it improved resolution in January of 2025, on the same day that they dropped the reveal trailer for the Switch 2. And then now, a year later, they casually just decided, hey, you can play it looking a little bit nicer. Also, we're gonna give you Dixie Kong now, which completely breaks the game. But, I mean, it is a free update, which is something that is very admirable for this Wii title that was released in 2025 for $60. Oh, and speaking of which, they also gave a free update for Animal Crossing: New Horizons. Yeah, the very same game that came out during the pandemic ended up selling like 25 million Switches. 6 years later, everybody was like waiting for the next Animal Crossing, anticipation, excitement, and then this update drops, so now everybody's freaking out because we're like, are we ever gonna get a new Animal Crossing game? But hey, it is a free update. They optimized the visuals for the Nintendo Switch 2 display and improved the image quality. And there was like a big Animal Crossing 3.0 update that came out a few months ago, and it's part of like the hype of Animal Crossing, and it got it on the top of the charts again, and, you know, part of the drip feeding. The little carrot they dangle in front of people so they can fill out the calendar and give them something to talk about while they wait another year and a half for another title. Well, yeah, these are all Switch 1 games. There's even a 2D Mario. No, it's not Mario Maker, which is what you would think it would be. And Mario Wonder, well, okay, they didn't include that in the Mario situation because that one is actually going to require you to spend $20 if you want to get the improvement, because it is going to be a Switch 2 edition game. And it has like all of the same baggage as the other Switch 2 edition titles, where if you wanted to play Mario Wonder on the Switch 2 with like improved visuals, you're forced to buy the DLC, but the DLC on that game is supposedly not going to be that well because it's like this Bell Park. I don't know, we'll hold off on that one. It can't be anything as bad as Mario Party. What's wrong with Mario Party, you ask? Google it. I don't want to go through that one right now. Oh, speaking of which, while you're Googling Switch 2 edition games, you also might notice that Animal Crossing New Horizons also got a Switch 2 edition. I know, I just said that it was a free update, so it plays better and you get all the improvements already with the optimized visuals. And I know you're probably wondering what's included in the Switch 2 edition. And to that I say, I have no freaking idea. But I do know it can't be much because it's only $5. Now, $5 sounds like a good price, but you have to remember, if Nintendo's only charging you $5 for something, it's probably more worth it for you to just build a time machine, go back in time to the worldwide pandemic, and enjoy Animal Crossing back then when you were happy. And before I move on from that, because I know you're going to ask me this question, yeah, we all thought that if the upgrade pack was going to be $10, then it would be included with Nintendo Switch Online. Animal Crossing is kind of the exception, although not really, because it's not a $10 upgrade. It's a $5 upgrade, so you got to read the fine print. If it's a $10 upgrade, it's included with NSO. If it's a $5 upgrade, build a time machine. So I hope this clarifies everything for you. It all makes sense now, right? Oh, hang on a second. Did you ask me how much the games cost? Okay. So every single one of these Switch 1 games are still the same price they were when they came out. Yeah, I know some of them came out in 2017 and they're still the same price. But at the very least, I mean, most of these are the big hitters, so everybody bought them. Oh, you didn't have that many games on your Switch 1, so you were just excited to jump in with the new console because you put off buying a Switch game for a few years because you're like, oh, the Switch 2 is coming soon. Oh, yeah, you're still going to be paying full price for these games. But look, the Switch library is amazing. There are so many very good Switch 1 titles that are just timeless because, you know, they're Nintendo games. So there's not like you can put a timestamp on when these games expire. So they're always going to be worth the full price. And it's like, you know, all of the best sellers that were available on the Switch 1 are on the Switch 2. And you can enjoy most of the great ones with these upgrades, either by, you know, dishing out an additional $20 here or there, or getting the free update. The free updates are great. Yeah, like I said, it's all of the big hitters, all of the most popular Switch 1 games. Well, okay, hang on. I don't want to mislead you. Let's just go through the list, starting from top to bottom, about the best-selling Switch 1 games, and I'll tell you whether or not they are included somewhere in this update. So the very best-selling game on the Switch 1 that had an amazingly long shelf life, and it's probably the reason why Mario Kart World was the launch title for the Switch 2, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, yeah, they didn't update that one. After that, Animal Crossing, hey, that made the list. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, no updates. Breath of the Wild and Odyssey and Scarlet and Violet, they got theirs, although Scarlet and Violet were broken on the Switch, so it was kind of just like here, we're gonna fix it for you finally. But nothing for Sword and Shield. Tears of the Kingdom got an update. You had to pay for it, but it got one. And the Switch 2 edition of Tears of the Kingdom is an $80 MSRP title at the store, so yay. But following that would be Super Mario Party, and obviously they can't give you an update for that because Mario Party Jamboree ended up getting a Switch 2 edition, and they don't want to confuse you. Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, we already mentioned that. Nintendo Switch Sports, no update yet. Mario Bros. Wonder, well, thankfully there is a Switch 2 edition you're going to spend $20 on soon. Ring Fit, well, technically Ring Fit Adventure is not a Switch 2 game that doesn't support it because the Joy-Con doesn't fit into the little strap. It actually works, but they tell you that it doesn't work because otherwise there's lawsuits, and, you know, Nintendo is very careful about legalities. Nothing special for Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, nothing special for Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, nothing special for Pokemon's Legends Arceus, nothing with Luigi's Mansion 3, although it's not all doom and gloom. They included the original Luigi's Mansion with the Nintendo Classics for GameCube just before Halloween. Yeah, you can play GameCube games on the Nintendo Classics now, just like you could play all of the Nintendo 64 and SNES and NES games. And yes, they are of course also drip-feeding the hell out of those titles and taking way too much time to release all of the big hitters that you would expect on a GameCube Classic Edition. And yes, you are absolutely better off just using Dolphin. But anyway, let's just talk about some of the most popular games on the Switch, right? Like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, we mentioned that a few times. There are no Switch 2 versions or upgrades on that. Mario Tennis Aces, well, you know, see, they can't do anything for that game because just like with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, they can't update the original version because they're releasing a new one for the Switch 2. This is actually one of the rare occasions where there's actually a new game coming for the Switch 2. Skyward Sword HD, well, that's a Wii game. Why would they give you a Switch 2 visual upgrade on that? Even though they did for Donkey Kong and for the Mario Galaxy titles. The Mario Galaxy titles came out for the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 simultaneously, but it's just a Switch 1 game. So technically it should have been like a Switch 2 edition and a Switch 1 release, but they combined them and sold them for $70. Which, I mean, if you're comparing it to something like Skyward Sword HD and Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, seems like a very good deal. But that's only because after you're punched in the nose, suddenly getting pinched doesn't feel as bad. But look, I mean, you know, you can still enjoy the Switch 1 games. It doesn't matter if Paper Mario and Yoshi's Crafted World and Super Mario RPG and Metroid Dread and a lot of other games are not getting updates for the Switch 2. You can still enjoy them. I know I said the big hitters were all getting some kind of good boost, and you might have to pay a little bit for some of them, but at least almost all of them are. Okay, maybe not almost all of them, at least almost some of them are. Like, come on, like Pikmin 4 got a pretty huge update. Everybody loves it, I think. I'm not really in the Pikmin circles. So it's not all doom and gloom. Oh, sorry, no, Pikmin 4 actually did not get a Switch 2 edition. It just got a huge update out of nowhere, and apparently Pikmin fans are pretty upset about this. But hey, I mean, Pikmin fans should be happy because you might have just ended up getting whatever Animal Crossing got. Although, technically Animal Crossing did get the visual performance updates without needing to pay the $5. So, maybe Pikmin fans should be upset. But listen, I mean, I've been going for 20 minutes, so I'm really hoping you were taking notes because this should all make sense now. It's actually not that complicated. And it's just very unfortunate right now that there are so many grifters out there spreading negativity about Nintendo. As long as you owned a Switch 1 for a solid 8 years and you purchased every single first-party title on there, then this console is totally worth it to you as long as you're willing to drop an extra couple $100 on all of the different upgrades you can get for all of those first-party titles. You don't even need to drop all of those couple hundreds back, because even with these convoluted updates that they're bringing in and, randomized about how they're going to update everything, they're still drip feeding that, so you can save that $200 and stretch it out over a few years. That's what Nintendo wants you to do. In the same time, you can remain subscribed to Nintendo Switch Online and wait for those games to be dripped out as well. So there's plenty on there to keep you busy and very happy in between the 1 or 2 worthy Switch 2 games that are actually going to be brand new for the console. There's going to be third-party games too. They're going to be objectively worse than any other place you can play them, but they are going to be there. Oh, you don't buy third-party titles on Nintendo consoles? Yeah, nobody does, so I understand that. Then, okay, before I close this off, I'm sure you're probably wondering how I know this so well and like how much I play with my Switch 2. The reality is I actually don't have a Switch 2 because I felt it was much smarter to buy a Legion Go and put my entire Switch 1 library on there. Yeah, it's actually completely legal, and there's nothing wrong with it. Many people don't realize this. I had to do some Googling and searching online, but it was a little bit of effort, and it was well worth it for me. And now, for the $400 that I spent on my Legion Go, I can play every single Switch 1 game with pretty much peak performance, at least better performance than it had on the Switch. Then I don't gotta spend any additional money on it. And since Nintendo is not really releasing that many Switch 2 games, it means that in the future, when I really want to buy in, because there's actually a handful of Switch 2 games that are finally worth buying, I'll probably be able to grab them used for a fairly decent price. But in the meantime, I have very much been enjoying my Nintendo Switch 2 experience on the Legion Go. Because effectively, the Nintendo Switch 2 experience is just the Nintendo Switch 1 with a better performance, and then just a bunch of asterisks by the end of that sentence, because it's not always gonna get the better performance. But in the case of my Legion Go, I always do, so that's awesome. So yeah, hopefully this all starts to make sense for you. You can finally enjoy your brand new Switch 2. The console you spent the past year telling yourself, when it comes to Christmas time, I'm gonna reward myself by gifting myself the brand new Switch 2. And don't worry, in about a month or two, maybe even quicker than that, depending on how active you are, you'll get to the buyer's remorse phase. That's also part of the experience. So just cool it. Stop complaining. That's part of enjoying the Nintendo. It's always been like that, even during Reggie and Iwata's time. We always hated our Nintendo consoles less than 6 months after buying them. But hey, I'm glad I could be of service to all of you. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and support my Patreon and my channel membership. And this video was sponsored by Sony, obviously, because everything is a console war, and you can't complain about Nintendo if you're not a Sony fan. And hit the hype button, it really helps us little channels. Adios!